It was past dinner rush, but the noise in the diner still echoed like a busy New York subway. Plates clanked, waitresses rushed by, and laughter bounced off the tiled walls like it belonged there more than she did. Amina stood just inside the door. Rainwater dripped from her sleeves, soaking into her too thin jacket. Her shoes squished with every step, but she walked carefully, like she didn't want to be seen. Or worse, noticed. She moved toward the far corner where 4 white diners sat at a booth. 2 men in business suits, a woman with a pearl necklace, and a younger girl with earbuds in. Their plates were half full. Steam still rose off mashed potatoes and grilled salmon. Her eyes didn't lock on the food, though. They locked on the woman. Amina stopped at the edge of their booth and swallowed. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. May I have your leftovers?" One of the businessmen let out a short, surprised laugh. The younger girl pulled her earbuds down. Did she just ask for our food? Across the diner, a man at another table smirked. "That's what happens when you feed 'em once," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. A couple at the next booth chuckled. Someone pulled out a phone, pretending to text, but aiming the camera at Amina. The woman in the pearl necklace stared at Amina. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. Amina didn't flinch. Her shoulders stayed straight, though soaked. Her hands hung at her sides, not pleading, not shaking, just waiting. The woman looked down at her plate. The salmon was barely touched. She picked up her fork, as if to hand it over, then stopped. Her fingers tightened on the silverware. She set it down slowly and drew the plate a little closer. Amina didn't beg again. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the woman's face, not with anger or desperation, just quiet hope. The waiter came over quickly, voice clipped. "Miss, we don't allow solicitation in here. You'll have to leave." Amina nodded once. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She turned around, walking past the tables of hot food and cold stares. The floor was slippery from her shoes. One man snorted. Another shook his head. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. The woman was still watching her, but her plate was empty now, and her hands were folded in her lap. Amina pushed the door open and stepped into the rain. Nobody followed. Nobody spoke, except the man from earlier, who muttered under his breath, "They're everywhere these days." Inside, the laughter slowly returned. But at the far end of the diner, that booth stayed quiet. The woman didn't touch her plate again. Not because it was finished, but because something else had started. The RV creaked whenever the wind hit hard, like it was tired of standing. It sat alone at the edge of an abandoned parking lot in Jackson, Mississippi, half covered with a blue tarp, its tires more rust than rubber. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of old fabric and damp shoes. Amina sat curled in the corner, wrapped in her grandmother's old quilt, watching a candle flicker beside a half-empty can of beans. Her grandma stirred the pot slowly, humming something that didn't sound happy, but didn't sound sad either. Just old. "You get anything, baby?" she asked without turning around. Amina hesitated. "No, ma'am. They were closing." Her grandma nodded. "Ain't no shame in asking, but ain't no shame in walking away either." Amina stared at the tiny stove flame. "I didn't beg. I just asked." "I know you did. That's why I raised you with manners." Rain tapped the metal roof above like impatient fingers. Amina's socks were still wet. She peeled them off and placed them near the vent, hoping the little bit of warm air might help. The wind howled again, rocking the RV slightly, but neither of them flinched. They were used to weather, and worse. Her grandma handed her the bowl. Amina took it with both hands like it was something precious. The beans weren't hot, but they were food. "I miss Mama," she said after a few bites. "I know, baby. I miss her too. She used to sing while she cooked, real loud." "She did everything loud," her grandma chuckled softly, "especially when she loved." Amina smiled faintly. "I remember her food. It made the whole trailer smell good." "She learned from me," her grandma said, pride slipping into her voice for just a moment. Then it vanished. But she didn't get the chance to keep learning. Silence crept in, like it always did after they mentioned her mother. Amina reached into her backpack and pulled out a wrinkled school worksheet. It was for tomorrow, but she always did them early when she could. She didn't know how long the electricity would last. Outside, a car drove by, slowed down, then kept going. People always stared at the RV but never stopped. The light flickered. Her grandma sighed. "If this weather keeps up, that generator ain't gonna last." "We'll be okay," Amina said quietly. "We always are." Her grandma smiled at that. "You're your mama's child." The candle danced on Amina's face as she scribbled math problems in the dim light. She didn't complain about the cold, the hunger, the wet socks. She just did her work. But deep down, she wanted something warm. Not just food, not just heat. She wanted to feel like she belonged somewhere. Earlier that week, a teacher had pulled her aside after class. "You're a bright girl," she'd said. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." Amina had nodded, but said nothing. She didn't know how to explain that the world had been trying to make her feel small long before she understood the words for it. She looked at her bowl. Only a few beans left. She placed the spoon down slowly, like she didn't want it to make a sound. "Tomorrow," her grandma said, "you go back to that diner?" Amina shrugged. "Maybe." "Remember what your mama always said?" Amina nodded. "Dignity is knowing you're worth something, even when the world forgets." Her grandma looked at her and smiled, this time longer. "You still believe that?" Amina pulled the quilt tighter around her. "I have to." The wind howled again. But inside the rusted RV, it was quiet, and stronger than it looked. The diner buzzed louder now. Friday night. Neon lights glowed through the windows, streaking blue and red across the floor tiles like a cheap disco. Inside, forks scraped against plates, and conversations rolled in waves, light, casual, comfortable. No one noticed Amina at first. She stood just inside the door, her hoodie dripping onto the welcome mat. Her socks were still damp from the walk, and the cold had numbed her fingers, but her eyes were wide open. She looked around, not for someone she knew, but for someone who wouldn't flinch. She walked past the booths slowly. Some people gave her polite side eyes. Others didn't look at all. At table 6, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed. The mother gently turned his face away. Amina approached a table near the back. 2 white teenage girls scrolling on their phones, giggling between bites of onion rings. One of them noticed Amina and whispered something. The other one looked up. "Can we help you?" Amina hesitated. "No, I'm sorry." She turned, but her path was cut off by a waitress holding a tray of desserts. "Excuse me," the waitress said sharply. "Are you lost, sweetie?" Amina shook her head. "I'm not lost." Well, you can't stand around like this. Are you waiting for someone? No, ma'am. The waitress lowered her voice. You can't just come in here and hang around. This is a private business. I was just... I was going to ask if someone was done with their food. The waitress's eyes narrowed. You mean you want scraps? Amina said nothing. The tray in the waitress's hand tilted slightly. One of the sundaes wobbled, but she caught it. Her mouth tightened. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We don't allow that here. A voice called from a booth nearby. Is she begging? It was a man in his 50s, wearing a jacket with a golf club logo. His wife chuckled lightly. She's probably recording. That's what they do now. A teenager 2 tables down had already pulled out his phone. He zoomed in as Amina stood frozen, unsure of where to go. Someone laughed, soft at first, then louder. Y'all better check your purses, a man joked. She might snatch a steak. The laughter spread like wildfire. One woman pretended to hand over her bread basket, then yanked it back and laughed like she'd told the best joke of the night. Amina's hands clenched into fists inside her hoodie sleeves, but she didn't speak. She just turned to leave. The camera followed her. The manager appeared near the register, eyes already tired. Is there a problem? The waitress pointed. She's trying to get food off customers' plates. I didn't touch anything, Amina said quickly. You were in here last week, too, the manager snapped. This ain't a shelter, little girl. A man near the bar raised his beer and said, They all learn the game young. One day it's food, next day it's a wallet. More laughter. Amina lowered her head and walked toward the exit, her steps quiet but heavy. The white woman from earlier, the one with the pearl necklace, was still watching. She hadn't touched her salmon. She hadn't spoken. Her fingers played with her napkin now, crumpling it slowly. Amina reached the door. Her hand touched the handle, then paused. She turned her head just enough to glance back. The teenager with the phone caught her face in frame. Soaked hair, tired eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. He posted it later that night. Beggar girl gets kicked out LOL skull and crossbones. It got over 20,000 views in 4 hours. But inside that moment, there was no laugh track, no music, no comments, just a soaked black girl being filmed for sport. She stepped into the night again, back into the cold. Inside the diner, the chatter slowly resumed. Plates refilled, conversations picked up. But the woman in pearls still hadn't touched her plate. And across from her, the businessman who had laughed earlier now sat quieter, stealing glances toward the door, like something didn't sit right anymore. Something about those eyes. The lights from the diner glared through the windshield of Laura's car. She sat behind the wheel, engine off, fingers still resting on the ignition like she couldn't quite decide if she was going to drive or disappear. Rain slid down the glass in messy trails. The wipers squeaked once, then stopped. She stared straight ahead. But she wasn't seeing the road. She was seeing the girl, the tiny voice, the soaked sleeves, and those eyes. They weren't begging eyes. That's what had shaken her. They weren't pleading, broken, or manipulative. They were still, like she'd already accepted what the world had decided she was worth. Laura exhaled slowly, pressing her back against the seat. Her heart was beating faster than it should have. She'd seen kids like that before, plenty of them. But this one, it pulled something old from inside her chest. Something she thought she'd buried a long time ago. She reached into the glove box and pulled out a napkin. Her hands trembled slightly as she dabbed her forehead, even though she wasn't sweating. A flash of memory hit her. Hard. She was 8, standing in the school hallway with a paper lunch bag that had split open. All her food had spilled. The other kids were laughing, stepping over crushed sandwiches and a broken apple. And then a custodian. Tall, black, soft-spoken. He crouched beside her and helped gather what he could. "You need another sandwich?" he'd asked. She had nodded, too embarrassed to speak. He disappeared and came back with a peanut butter sandwich in plastic wrap. Didn't say where it came from, just smiled. She remembered his name, Mr. Ellis. He worked in the background. No one noticed him, until she needed something. He used to hum gospel songs while mopping the floors. Always said, "Don't let shame make your decisions." Laura blinked hard. Her hands gripped the steering wheel again. Back in the diner, she'd sat silent, watching the little black girl be laughed at, filmed, humiliated, and she'd done nothing. She'd crumpled her napkin, pulled the plate closer, shut herself off. And now she couldn't breathe right. She opened the door and stepped into the rain without a jacket. She didn't care. She needed air. But more than that, she needed a direction. She looked left, then right. Her car was parked at the side of the building, and just beyond the dumpsters, she spotted a small figure huddled under the metal awning, trying to stay dry. It was her. Amina was kneeling beside a trash bin, carefully peeling the top off a wet takeout box someone had tossed. Her fingers were shaking, but she moved slow, like she'd done this before. Laura took one step forward, then another. She didn't even feel the cold anymore. Amina didn't hear her until she was just a few feet away. When she looked up, her eyes didn't widen in fear. She just paused, then sat back on her heels. "I'm not stealing," Amina said softly. "I know," Laura replied. Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. "I saw what happened." Amina looked down at the fries in the box. "I wasn't going to eat the gross stuff." Laura crouched beside her, the rain soaking into her slacks. "You remind me of someone," she said. "Someone who once helped me when no one else would." Amina didn't speak. Her eyes searched Laura's face, unsure whether to trust her or not. Laura smiled gently. "His name was Mr. Ellis. He gave me a sandwich when I had nothing. He didn't ask questions, just looked at me like I mattered." The words hung in the air for a long moment. Laura reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. "I don't want to give you money," she said, "but I'd like to sit down and eat dinner with you. Would that be okay?" Amina hesitated. "Like, inside?" Laura nodded. "No takeout, no scraps. You sit at the table. You eat like you deserve to be seen." Amina didn't smile. Not yet. But something flickered across her face. A tiny shift. Not relief, not joy. Just something warm, something almost forgotten. Hope. Rain was still falling, but softer now, like even the sky had paused to watch. Laura held the umbrella low over Amina's head, letting the left side of her own shoulders soak. She didn't mind. Not tonight. Amina walked beside her, one step behind, eyes lowered. Not from fear, but caution. Life had taught her to be careful when kindness suddenly showed up. The diner door jingled again as they stepped back inside. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. The same tables were full. Same people still laughing a few minutes ago. Now they weren't laughing. Laura stepped forward. Amina stayed frozen near the door. "Come on," Laura said gently. "I don't want to get you in trouble," Amina whispered. Laura turned back and gave her a soft look. "If anyone says a word, they'll be talking to my lawyer before their coffee cools." Someone at a nearby booth snorted. Laura ignored it and led Amina to a booth near the window. Not hidden in the corner. Not close to the kitchen. Right in the middle. The waitress from before approached slowly, mouth half open, eyes flicking from Laura to Amina. "She's with me," Laura said, her voice sharp but calm. The waitress nodded stiffly and walked away. Amina slid into the booth cautiously. She'd never sat in one this clean before. Her eyes moved across the table. The laminated menu, the silverware in a neat napkin, the glass of water already waiting. "Order anything you want," Laura said, sitting down across from her. Amina didn't move. She stared at the menu but didn't touch it. "You ever had hot chicken and waffles?" Laura asked. Amina shook her head. "Just waffles. The kind you pop in a toaster." "Well," Laura smiled, "you're about to meet the real thing." The waitress returned, this time with a notepad. "We'll take 2 plates of the hot chicken and waffles," Laura said, "and a side of mac and cheese. She's growing." Amina blinked. It felt like too much too fast. The waitress nodded and left. The room still hadn't relaxed. Phones were still in hands. Whispers still circled from booth to booth. A man near the counter muttered, "What's this world coming to?" Laura looked him straight in the eye. He looked away. She turned back to Amina. "People are going to stare. Let them," she said. Amina looked down. "They stared when I was outside, too." Laura's heart tightened. "And they'll stare even more when you become something none of them expected." Their food came fast, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear. The plates hit the table steaming, golden, and full. Amina just looked at it at first. She didn't move. "It's yours," Laura said gently. "Not borrowed. Not begged. Yours." Amina slowly reached for the fork, her fingers trembling just slightly. She took the first bite, and her eyes widened just a little. It was hot, rich, seasoned, real. She chewed slowly, carefully, like the moment might disappear if she rushed it. Laura didn't speak. She just watched. For 10 straight minutes, no one at their table said a word. But it wasn't awkward. It was sacred. When Amina had eaten almost half, she finally looked up. "Thank you," she said. Laura smiled softly. "You don't owe me that." Amina tilted her head. "Then why did you come back?" Laura paused. "Because someone helped me when I was little. And I didn't know how much that moment meant until I watched you walk out into the rain." Amina nodded once, as if she understood. A couple at another table stood up and left. One of them whispered something like, "Ridiculous." But no one responded this time. The tension in the room shifted. The manager peeked from the back, eyes sharp, but didn't approach. Laura reached into her purse and took out a business card. "I own a few nonprofits. One of them feeds kids in the summers when schools close. You'd be surprised how many people don't think that matters." She slid the card across the table. "I could use someone with your kind of strength. Would you consider helping us? Part-time, safe space, real food." Amina looked at the card, then at Laura. "You want me to work there?" Laura smiled. "I want you to belong somewhere." Amina nodded slowly, then folded the card carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket like it was worth more than gold. Laura stepped out of her car, and pulled her coat tighter against the cold wind. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the sky was already bleeding soft gold along the edges. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was clean. A small converted community hall stood across the street. Its walls were freshly painted, the door wide open, and a modest banner hung from the top. Amina's table, where every plate means respect. Inside, folding tables had been dressed up with red checkered cloths. Baskets of cornbread and bowls of mashed potatoes filled the air with warmth. Volunteers moved quietly, placing pitchers of lemonade on each table. Children played near the back, their laughter echoing through the room. In the middle of it all stood Amina. She wore a simple white shirt, clean jeans, and her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wasn't the same girl who once stood dripping in a diner doorway. She moved with purpose now, nodding to staff, adjusting chairs, checking the food trays. Every now and then, she'd glance out the window, almost like she still couldn't believe this place existed. Laura watched from the doorway, unnoticed. A volunteer finally spotted her and waved. "Miss Laura." Amina turned. When she saw her, her whole face lit up, not just with a smile, but with a kind of quiet pride that hadn't been there before. Laura stepped in, brushing off her coat. "You're early," Amina said. "I was curious if you'd actually built it," Laura replied with a grin. Amina looked around. "I didn't build it alone." "No," Laura said, "but it has your fingerprints all over it." Amina led her through the room, pointing out new things, donated kitchen gear, bookshelves filled with children's stories, a quiet corner with a few board games. "We serve hot meals 3 nights a week now," Amina explained. "Kids, elders, anyone who needs. No IDs, no forms, no questions." Laura nodded, taking it all in. "You'd turned one moment into something this big." Amina paused near the back wall, where a small picture frame hung alone. Inside it was an old laminated lunch menu from the diner. Beneath it, a handwritten line. "Dignity is knowing you're worth something, even when the world forgets." Laura stared at it. "That was your mom's line," she whispered. Amina nodded. "She said it every time we had nothing. So now it's on the wall where everyone can see." The doors opened wider now as the dinner crowd began trickling in. Single moms, tired grandmas, quiet kids holding hands with older siblings. No one looked ashamed. No one had to ask for leftovers. They were greeted at the door, handed plates, and welcomed like guests. A white man in a construction jacket gave Amina a shy nod. "Appreciate you, miss," he said. She smiled and handed him a tray. "Glad you came." Laura watched the exchange closely. "He's new?" "Came in last week with his daughter. Didn't say much. Now he's the first one through the door." The room filled fast. Someone cranked up soft jazz on a speaker. A few kids started dancing in the back. Amina sat across from Laura briefly while others served. "I don't think they even remember what happened that night," she said. "I bet they do," Laura replied. "But they remember what happened after even more." Amina stirred her lemonade quietly. "I used to think, if I could just make enough people feel bad, maybe they'd stop treating kids like me that way." Laura looked at her. "And now?" "Now, I think, maybe if I just treat people better than they treated me, it might break the chain." A soft silence passed between them. "You're braver than you know," Laura said. Amina shrugged. "I'm just fed up." Laura smiled. "Same thing." They stood again. Another tray needed refilling. Another child needed a clean fork. But something had changed in that diner long ago. And now it had grown roots here, in a place where no one had to ask if they deserved to sit. The sun was setting behind the low rooftops of the neighborhood, casting warm amber light through the windows of Amina's table. The day had been long, but no one seemed to mind. The last guests were finishing their meals, and volunteers moved quietly, wiping tables and exchanging smiles that didn't need words. Amina stood near the serving counter, rolling up her sleeves. Her hands smelled faintly of buttered cornbread and dish soap. A little boy had spilled lemonade earlier, and she'd cleaned it up without blinking. She didn't flinch anymore. She didn't second-guess her presence in a room. Across the hall, Laura sat at one of the tables with a paper plate and a slice of pound cake. She watched Amina move with calm command, never raising her voice, never losing pace. A little girl tugged on Amina's shirt. "Miss Amina, can I take a second roll for my brother?" Amina smiled, crouched to her level. "Of course, but only if you promise to tell him he's got perfect timing." The girl giggled and nodded, then ran back to her table with a fresh roll. As the final few families trickled out, Amina stepped outside to get some air. The evening breeze was cooler now. The street was quiet. Just a few cars passing by, a dog barking down the block, and the soft hum of streetlights flickering on. She leaned against the brick wall and looked up at the sky. The stars weren't fully out yet, but the first few had begun to appear. They always reminded her of her mom. She remembered her voice, soft, strong, always humming something. Some nights, after the generator shut off, they'd sit together in silence under a sky just like this. No heat, no TV, just breath and memory. Dignity, her mom used to whisper, is when they try to make you feel invisible and you shine anyway. Amina smiled at the memory, not the sad kind, the kind that felt like a fire had stayed lit somewhere deep in her chest. Behind her, the front door creaked open. Laura stepped out with 2 mugs in her hands. She handed one to Amina. "Hot cocoa," she said. "Your grandma said you don't like coffee." Amina laughed. She still doesn't trust people who drink it black. Laura leaned against the wall beside her. She's wise. They sipped in silence for a moment. "You did something beautiful here," Laura said. "You didn't just change the story. You rewrote it." Amina looked out across the dark street. "Sometimes I wonder how many kids walk into diners every day and leave with nothing but shame." Laura's jaw tightened, more than we want to admit. "I can't stop all of that," Amina said softly, "but I can make sure they have a place to come after." Laura nodded. "You already have." Inside, the last volunteers were turning off lights, collecting leftovers for donation runs, locking cabinets. A car pulled up out front, an old pickup, beat up and loud. A middle-aged white woman stepped out with 2 kids and hesitated before coming closer. She peered through the glass, unsure. Amina noticed and walked forward. "Can we still come in?" the woman asked quietly. "I know it's late." Amina smiled. "Of course. We'll fix you a plate. You like chicken and rice?" The woman's eyes softened, and the tension in her shoulders dropped. "That'd be perfect." Laura opened the door wider. "You're right on time." The family stepped inside. Amina didn't rush. She walked back behind the counter and tied her apron once more. She grabbed plates like it was the first hour of the day, not the last. She didn't look tired. She looked ready. Because for the first time in her life, She wasn't standing in a diner asking to be fed. She was standing in one, feeding others. A girl who once whispered for leftovers now served dignity with every plate. She didn't want revenge. She just didn't want to feel invisible again. And now, she never would.